live. Hello, friends. So this is Office Hours. If you've never joined Office Hours, you're in for a treat, or maybe, I don't know, it might not be fun. We'll see. But this is your opportunity to ask me questions. And I'm just sharing the link with everybody, YouTube and the Discord or the Zoom link, Office Hours. Okay, there we go. So let me share my screen. So yeah, once a week I do office hours to answer questions from people who have questions, and I do the best that I can to answer. I don't always promise that I will have a good answer, but I do promise that I will try for honest questions. So yeah, you can, I typically give priority to folks who are in the Zoom meeting, but you're more than welcome to come into the Discord and ask it in here. And then I just go through these when we get through folks who are in Zoom. And typically I'm able to get through everything. So feel free to start putting it in here. For some reason, people start throwing in questions when I say that I have like 2 minutes left. So like start putting them in right now, please. So I don't have a hard stop like I sometimes do. I think, yeah. So sometimes I will go over the hour, and I don't mind that too much. But yeah, get the questions in earlier. That helps. Okay, cool. So Daniel, you were here first. Did you have a question? You're also welcome to join Zoom just to hang out. That is also fine, folks.
Yeah, that's the first time I've come. So yeah, I had a couple. Well, one is a very quick and easy one, and then the other one's maybe more of a discussion. So I'll ask the simple one first. I'm going through your Epic React, and you do what I think is called a barrel export at the end, where everything's just kind of exported in an object versus just an export on each thing.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
know if there's like an advantage to that. I've always done it the other way.
Yeah, so I can definitely talk about this. So what we're saying is we've got a function foo, and then function bar, and then a const thing, and then export foo bar and thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and as you type that, I'm realizing maybe why that's even maybe necessary, because I've always done like const arrow function as kind of like my go-to.
Oh.
So maybe that's a different question. Why go with function instead?
Yeah, so I do have a answer for why I don't do the arrow functions when I can help it, and that is function forms, I think is what I called it. Yeah, nope, that's not it. I think actually it's functions. There we go. The title of the blog post is function forms. But basically the short answer is when you do a function declaration like this, I can call this function right here and it works. But I cannot call this function right here. That does not work because function declaration is hoisted to the top of the closure, whereas a function assignment, like this const other thing, is not hoisted above that spot in the closure. So it's just one less thing to think about. And so that's why I prefer doing the function declaration when I can. I don't always, like sometimes I'll have a on click and I'll just stick it right in there. So if I'm doing an anonymous function like that, I'm pretty much always doing an arrow function. But yeah, so that's the answer to that question. And does that make sense?
Yeah, and then that at that point requires the barrel export. Is that why that is?
No, so I can do the export like this. That works just fine. So and actually, interestingly, in Remix, you'll see me do stuff like this, which goes against what I just said. Like I do prefer the function declaration. The problem is that TypeScript does not allow you to type a function if it's not a function assignment. And so if I could, then I would do something like, I don't know how you would type this. It'd be something like loader function. I don't know, some stupid syntax that they come up with. But yeah, if I could, then I would do everything like this. I only do arrow functions when it doesn't make sense to do a function declaration. So talking about the exports though, I used to do everything like this. Now I've kind of converted over, but the argument that I had before when I did everything where it looks like an object, it's actually called export specifier. So if you look at astexplorer.net, and we'll just copy all this stuff over. Yeah, that our parser doesn't understand TypeScript, but yeah, if you click on, yeah, now it's complaining because we've got the same export. So let's just clean that up really quick. Okay, bump that up a lot, I guess. Okay, so we've got our export. This is an export named declaration is what this is called. By the way, this tool is really awesome. It shows you the names that at least people who have written JavaScript parsers have come up with these things. And most of the parsers are going to be similar. I typically actually use Babel parser when I'm looking at stuff like this. So yeah, it's an export named a declaration. And that's probably what the spec says. That's why the writers of the parser use the name for this type of node. But then inside of an export named declaration, we have specifiers. So these are each export specifiers. You see, as I hover over these, it highlights the one that I'm hovering over. So each one of these is an export specifier, and each one of those has an identifier. That's just what it's called. So like we can name this to be whatever we want. And if we wanted to, we could say as fax machine, I don't know. And so in that case, it's still an export specifier. The whole group of characters all together are called an export specifier. But there is a local, which is an identifier. That's the name of the local variable. And then there is the exported, which is what it's exported as. So anyway, there you go. So yeah, that was just to say it's not quite an object. It looks like an object, but it's not quite. And the reason that I go with this now is mostly because I joined Remix, and that's the way that they do it. It's that, and also in a Remix app, your route modules, it just makes it so much easier to just say export as you go than to say, okay, right. Okay, now I've got to do my exports.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I still think that using the export name specifier form makes sense for I don't know, like utility modules that have a bunch of utility functions inside of it, but you only want to export some of them, because the really annoying thing for me as a consumer of a module is to jump into the module and not know which of these things I have access to. And so I like being able to just like scroll down to the bottom of the file, or yeah, down to the bottom, and see all of the things that are exported. That's the argument I used to have. Now it doesn't really seem to hold that much weight for me. So I think that I have pretty much mostly switched to exporting as I go.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that wasn't technically an object. That was a more interesting answer than I expected.
Yeah. The same thing applies to imports. So if you import foo, or I guess I got a sandwich from sandwiches. So this is also not an object. This is an import specifier. And so then you can say as burger. Are burger sandwiches? Yes, they are. But how about this hot dog? I don't know. How about taco? Is a taco a sandwich? I don't know. Apparently it is. That's what we're calling it here. So in that case, it's still an import specifier, but you have the imported. So the thing that you're actually importing, what it's called from the what the module has exported as, and then the local, what we want to call it in our local file. So yep, there you go. It's kind of fun.
Cool.
So what was your other question?
Yeah, the other question's about CSS. So you've been a big CSS and JS fan for a while, right? And then you switched to Tailwind. So like I said, this is a little bit more of just a discussion thing, I guess.
Yeah.
We're looking at a lot of this at my company. We have a component library and a bunch of packages, but they need a lot of love, and they're based on Bootstrap 4. So then the whole question is, do we try to upgrade to Bootstrap 5, or do we go with Tailwind, or we do something else? And a lot of things are, and also all of our components are in their own individual packages. So it's not one component package. So it's just raising a lot of questions, because we have everything based on Bootstrap 4, and that means Bootstrap 4 is embedded in, like, I don't know, 60 to 100 apps across the company. It's embedded individually into all of our individually versioned components. So upgrading to anything is going to be quite a mess. So
Yeah,
we're
totally.
looking at, like, how to not put ourselves in that place again. At my previous company, we just used BEM, and we didn't even use like CSS modules or anything. Everything was in a mono repo, so it was really easy to track whether we had, like, two components with the same name that would have like a conflict with the class name or something. That's not the case at the new company. So I have concerns about using something like Tailwind, because at some point there will be an upgrade, and we'll be back in the same boat again unless we create a library where everything's versioned together. That would make it a little bit easier, but then you potentially have individual apps that are using a version of Bootstrap of Tailwind. Anyway, you get where I'm going there.
Yeah.
And the same would potentially be true with a CSS and JS library, with the added complexity of, with individual versioned components, would we just make something like a motion, like a peer dependency, or do we like actually bundle that into each component? Right? Which seems like too much, right?
Yeah.
That would bloat, you'd have a simple component and then you compile emotion into it,
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, all those things. I'm just wondering, your move to Tailwind from CSS and JS, and all the other kind of things that I've talked
Yeah,
about.
so I can speak from my experience in a similar boat. When I was at PayPal, we had just so many apps that needed work from a CSS perspective, and where I started at was we were just doing mostly SaaS stuff. And I before I joined the web infrastructure team, where I was responsible for this stuff, I was just on a product team. And I shouldn't say it that way. I was on a product team, not just. Product teams are great. I loved it. But because I was only responsible for my project, I made the decision to actually create a CSS and JS library called Glamorous, which eventually was superseded by Emotion. And so that worked out pretty well for me. But when I joined the web infra team, I was thinking about, okay, well, I want to do CSS and JS. It's been awesome for us. But I got a lot of pushback from folks who really preferred just regular CSS. They wanted to build a design system with, what are those called? Variables, whatever, atomic. I can't remember what those
CSS
things.
custom properties.
No, it's not like a tokens. That's what it is. The design.
Oh yeah, design tokens.
So that they could like generate stuff like CSS custom properties and things. Remind me to call my dad later. Ouch. Okay. And so they were saying like, hey, we could generate some CSS and JS, but we really, like, you need to remember that not everybody at PayPal is using React, and so they won't be able to use Emotion. And maybe React is the hotness right now, but it may not be in the next 5 years. Well, joke's on them, it still is, but this was maybe not quite 5 years ago, but yeah, I fully expect it still will be the hotness in the next couple of years. But in any case, they were right. Not everybody at PayPal was using React. They couldn't upgrade. They were still on Backbone or on AngularJS. And so because we're the web infra team, we needed to come up with something that was like generally applicable. And that is CSS, just regular CSS. And so we did decide, hey, everybody, I was building a tool, or I had built a tool by then called PayPal Scripts, that was like the tool for every new project. And it bundled in Webpack and Prettier and ESLint and everything. Like all of the stuff was just in testing, everything was in this tool. And people just installed that tool on every project. And then I would update, the version of Webpack, and all of a sudden everybody's apps are faster and stuff. Worked out really well. They're still using it, and it's still being maintained all these years later. So we said, hey, since we know everybody's using Webpack, or at least like anybody who isn't using, well, okay, so let me back up. What we decided to do was they built the token thing, and then they built a tool that would generate a bunch of CSS. And then I built a component library that consumed that CSS using CSS modules. So that I could, the big thing that I was concerned about was the product I was working on had about 90% unused CSS. So you pull up the coverage report, and you can actually do this here. If you go coverage, show coverage, it's just in this drawer here. We'll do a reload. And if we're looking at type, here's the CSS. And so, oh, that's my Chrome extension. Boo on that. Here, let's go. Yeah, you don't want Chrome extensions messing up your coverage numbers here. And I want to, there we go. Let's refresh. Here we go. Okay, so we're looking at our CSS. I've got pretty okay numbers here on the CSS. I think the biggest one, of course, is going to be the tailwind. And that is unused bytes. I think that's 74.3%, which is actually kind of surprising. But as you start like hovering over things and whatever, that number goes up. But what I did at PayPal was I said, I opened up the app, and I opened every modal, and I did every interaction that I possibly could think of, all the permutations, and I still was at 90% unused CSS, which was like totally blew my mind how much CSS we were shipping that was not being used. And so that was kind of frustrating to me. And so that was what I was thinking about a lot. I was like, well, we're for one, a big reason for that is we're bringing in or like we have a lot of different variants of different pages based on A/B testing and stuff. And so you build the variant, you copy paste a bunch of CSS so you don't mess up other people's stuff. And then when the variant goes away, the A/B test is gone. You don't remove the CSS because you don't know what it's doing. And so we just end up with a bunch of CSS bloat. So, and then on top of that, just like in regular, in the course of regular development, you just are never deleting stuff because you're worried about what's going to happen. So that's what I was thinking about. And I was like, okay, how do I make sure we avoid this problem? And and you can't, with the way we had things set up with just Sass and compiling stuff, you would just like take all of the CSS for the entire app and serve it. You couldn't code split that. And so that's why that was my original motivation to get over to CSS and JS with Glamorous. As I said, hey, now it's naturally code split. And if you delete the component, you also delete the CSS. And so our unused CSS started to improve. So anyway, when I was building this component library, it's like, I want to make sure we avoid this problem for the people who use the component library. And but I've been convinced that CSS and JS is not the way to do that for various reasons. Not everybody can use that. And so they generated, instead of generating CSS and JS, which they did experiment with, they actually like generated JavaScript files that had CSS and JS stuff in there. But we decided not to do that. So they generated regular CSS. And so for me, I just decided, hey, let's use CSS modules, and I can get the code splitting. I can get the like that can be, you use the extract plugin thing, and so now it's just regular CSS files, no runtime. And then what I would do is in the component library, I would just import the CSS file like a CSS module. And so then people, as they were using the modules, they didn't even have to think about how do I get the CSS on the page. They would just say, well, I'm going to bring in a button. And the CSS came along with it because they were using PayPal scripts, which had Webpack, and so it could do CSS modules. So that's the story. That's what I ended up doing. Now, as far as what I recommend, we didn't have exactly the same problem. Well, we certainly did, but that wasn't the problem that we were targeting when we were building out our solution. the nice thing about CSS modules is there's not exactly a library that you're interacting with that is going to like go over all of your entire app and like just weave its way into everything like Bootstrap has for you. So like if we decided if CSS modules needed to make a breaking change, it probably would be pretty localized to our tools, and we just fixed the tools and now everything's still working. And so we didn't really have libraries that we were worried about breaking for us. So that's one nice thing about CSS modules. I mean, the bad thing is we had to write it all ourselves. But at some point, at some scale, it kind of makes sense to do that. In some way. So that's just one thing to consider. As far as Tailwind, I should say that if people are using Emotion or CSS and JS right now, they've got a big app and it's not like causing them problems, just stick with it, like move on to your other stuff and wait until it's a big enough problem that it becomes a priority for you. I wouldn't have taught it if it were bad. And so it's fine. It's not the best, but it's not bad. It's fine. It has trade-offs. So anyway, as far as Tailwind and breaking changes, I totally see that. What I would suggest is try to, if you wanted to go with Tailwind or with Bootstrap or whatever library you want to use, I think CSS is one of those situations where wrapping it makes a lot of sense. And so like the idea of like, oh, you wrap every one of your dependencies and now if they break stuff, you are fine. That doesn't always hold water because like, yeah, well, if you're literally just proxying the API and they break the API, like you're not going to be able to do too much with your little wrapper. Sometimes it helps, but in the case of CSS libraries and stuff, I think wrapping it makes a lot of sense. And you wrap it in components. So you have a button and you have a card and you have like all these different components. You have even components that are responsible for layout. And so then the idea there is that if you decide, hey, we're going to totally revamp, we're switching from Bootstrap to Tailwind. Now your component library is what gets updated. And hopefully people have just been using those components. Like the product engineers are just using the components. They like very rarely, if ever, use Tailwind classes themselves or Bootstrap classes or whatever. That's like the holy grail. Like that's what, that would make things so easy. In practice, I don't think that really happens all that much. Like there are always one-offs, and the right way to deal with one-offs is to go back to the designer and say, hey, this isn't in the design system. So you got to get it in the design system before you give it to me as a design. Like that's the proper way for this to happen. But of course that it doesn't work that way in practice. Like they're like, no, we got to ship this thing. And that's a whole process to get that into the design system and then into the component library so that you can finally use it. And so in that sense, I think like in the high speed, we need to ship this. I think it would make sense for them to like build the component that they want to have in the component library and then use that. And then hopefully that can get into the component library. So they're still not spreading those classes throughout their app. They're just using components throughout the app. So I think that would help hedge your bets against changing libraries quite a bit. And then another thing to consider is what about just regular CSS and CSS modules? CSS modules are pretty much here to stay. I would be like, people don't know this, but they are so widely used. Like so many people are using CSS modules. Everybody thinks that, oh, everybody's on styled components. No, styled components is actually a pretty close second from what I have observed. But CSS modules is crazy widely used. So I'm pretty confident with CSS modules as a philosophy, as well as just it's staying around, and it's very stable because it's more of a spec than anything. And so I wouldn't feel too bad to recommend to you to bet on CSS modules. In fact, in Remix, we are working on our component CSS story, trying to figure out what's best for us and for our users. And we're pretty much landing on CSS modules for component CSS. And we may even in the future bring in vanilla extract. possibly. I don't know. So vanilla extract is basically CSS modules, but now it's fully typed, which I think is a pretty big win. So we may end up bringing that in, but that's right now we're just focused on CSS modules. So that's just to say that we've done our due diligence, and I'm pretty sure that that is what we're gonna land on. The other thing though, the current solution for Remix is just use style sheets, and that kind of, if it weren't for Remix, that would be like going back to the days of when at PayPal we had 90% unused CSS, where everybody's freaked out about deleting stuff. Except because the way Remix works, the CSS can be a style sheet can be associated to a particular route, which is the way most people think about it. And when you're not on that route, the style sheet isn't there. So it's not like concatenating everything and putting it on every page. It is more route specific. It makes it a lot easier to make those changes. And so where this comes into play is you build your component library. It's CSS modules. People are using the component library. They need to do some one-off thing that doesn't make sense in a component. Now they just make a style sheet for that route, and they can do whatever garbage they want to in there. And as long as they just check the routes that style sheet is included on, which should just be one, or I suppose it could be a parent that has some children. So as long as they check those routes, they know for certain that they're not going to be impacting anywhere else in the app. So, and then it's also code split. And so that kind of Remix kind of eliminates a lot of the problems that we had with using regular style sheets. And so this is a really long story to tell you that I think what I would do if I were in your situation, what I would evaluate is I would say, let's try CSS modules mixed with style sheets. Of course, you probably will have the problems with style, like having to concatenate all of your styles because you're not using Remix right now. And it's probably not something that you can invest time into migrating everybody over in the immediate future. And so, although it shouldn't be a huge effort if you're already using React Router, but I digress. So anyway, I think, yeah, so that taking that into consideration, if you're not using Remix, then style sheets are probably not the best approach. Just for all of the, concatenate it. Now you've got 90% unused CSS that nobody wants to delete. So without Remix, style sheets are too challenging. So you could just do CSS modules for everything then. And I think that would probably be your safest bet. But again, the biggest problem with that is now you have to build everything yourself. Whereas like Tailwind is already a thing that you can just use. I wouldn't personally, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't upgrade to Bootstrap 5, just because Tailwind is better. I really love Tailwind a lot. It's awesome. Another thing that you could think about is, if I can remember it, I think it's called Open Props. Maybe Jacob might know it. Yeah, here it is. Yep, openprops.style. This one is kind of interesting. I haven't taken any time to look into it yet. But this is like a level below Tailwind, where instead of giving you a bunch of atomic class names, they give you a bunch of atomic CSS variables. And then you can use those. So you could take the strategy of CSS modules, but then also use this or something like this. And how like one of the big benefits of Tailwind is the consistency that you get. And I think with something like this, you could actually get that same sort of consistency without having to use that Tailwind. And I think like my impression of it is that it is a lot simpler. Sorry, let me say that differently. Not simpler, but there are fewer variables and things. So if you decided, hey, they upgraded and broke everything, we're just going to vendor that and we'll be responsible for it now, and maintain that ourselves. I think you could be in a better state if that were to ever happen in the future. So again, I haven't actually used this or anything, but it is something that I would also investigate if I were in your position. And for goodness sake, they have blobs. Like, why not? So anyway, there you go. Big discussion topic for you. Hopefully that was sort of helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I have follow-ups, but I don't want to like take
That's
everyone's
okay.
time. I
No,
don't know how much.
it's fine. We've still got more
Okay.
weeks in the future.
All right. Yeah, this I hadn't heard of this, but we are developing a set of design tokens, which is what we did at the last company where like, as I'm looking at Tailwind and the big argument about like, well, it gives you, a fixed scale for whatever you're doing. Like I've never had that problem because we did design tokens. So
Yeah,
you would never, in your app, you never see a hex code. Like it needs to be a CSS variable in there, right? So we would just reject a PR if somebody did that, So everything was pretty consistent just because of the tokens. But where was it going? Okay, so I had wrote down a couple things. Because I've kind of, you're saying Tailwind is nice because you don't have to write everything from scratch. I kind of came into the industry from like a design side, so like I'm extremely comfortable. And
you're like I want to write things
seems
from
like
scratch.
super natural. And when I came to this current company, everything's bootstrap. I'm so annoyed. I like hate like looking up a class name for something that I know how to write already. But and I think I would feel the same way about Tailwind, but hey,
I'm sure you would.
Plenty of people love it, so I can't say it's like bad just because it's distasteful to me. But anyway, so I don't have any problem writing the CSS. I enjoy it, but the big problem that I didn't until recently realize was such a big problem is what you're talking about with the code splitting. And I actually watched a video of yours where I don't know from how long ago, where you were talking about like a Babel plugin or something that you wrote to provide, so you could import multiple components from your PayPal library, but still get the code splitting. And it seemed like there was no real, I tried to look for the link to that because you had a GitHub example and you had a video on YouTube, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, definitely sounds like something I would do. It sounds familiar. I can't remember what it was though.
Yeah, and it just I had to like go check some of the places that I've like drawn inspiration from. Like I've looked a lot at Adobe's React Spectrum, and they're just importing style sheets into their components. And then I like loaded up a little sample app and imported like just their button. And sure enough, accordion styles, card styles, everything was there, right? And so that to me is the one, like CSS just seems so like, like just using the browser, like nothing fancy, just like, the basics. And I love that, but like, that's a pretty big problem.
Yeah, it's significant at scale. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that CSS modules can do the code splitting. That surprised me.
Yeah. So if you do it right, what we did at PayPal was I made the component library called PP React, which in retrospect, I should have just called it PayPal React. And people told me, because I made PayPal scripts. They're like, just do PayPal React. And I was like, no, PP, it's shorter. No. Anyway, so stupid. So what we did was it was a monorepo with individual packages for everything. And then we had one package that just re-exported everything. The challenge there is that one package would have to do a breaking change anytime any one of those individual components do breaking changes. So that I imagine by now it's probably version 20 or something. But like, yeah, who cares? It's not a big deal.
That's a topic I'd like to ask you another day.
Yeah.
The individual versioning of our component library.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
We'll save that.
Each one of the things was like an app pp react / button, app pp react / accordion. And then through the magic of tree shaking, if you imported just pp react and you do a name specifier of like button and accordion, then all you're getting are the button and accordion code. What you had to do though, and maybe this is what the video I was showing was, is you had to label that package as having no side effects. And I think there's, yeah, you know what? There was, yeah, I know that Babel plugin was. It was kind of similar to Babel plugin Lodash. And you could build like your own Babel plugin if you're using Babel, or like probably an ES build plugin or something. But basically what this does is it transforms this, which will bring in the entire library, into this, which just brings in the specific pieces. So that's what my Babel plugin did, was it would say, oh, you want this from React? Well, instead of importing it from that, I'm going to import it from the submodule that is being exported. And so that's how I accomplish the, and I imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if the React Spectrum from Adobe had something similar to this, because it is like a significant problem. So yeah, but that's just one thing that you want to make sure you're thinking about and have a solution for. At a company, you typically can just say, hey, everybody has to use this tool, and now we solve that problem.
And we do have something like the PayPal scripts. We have like a thing called workflow that just has all of our Webpack config and everything in it. So I assume we could roll that in.
Yeah.
And that's still how you would go today to if you were just using CSS.
Yeah, let's see.
That's the direction you'd go.
Here's my perfect world where everybody's using Remix, and our component library. I don't know, man. I sure love Tailwind, but I see where you're coming from. It is kind of annoying to be like, I just need this to be a certain font size, and I don't remember what the class name for that is. And like, it's super annoying. But I mean, it's a familiarity thing. You get used to it, whatever.
Yeah.
And the consistency is nice. But like when you've got your own tokens, again, like you said, the consistency isn't a problem. So yeah, I think probably a CSS modules component library, because like you've got to have a component library for like any project with like teams and stuff. Like any enterprise, it's going to need to have a component library just to avoid duplication of effort. And so yeah, you've got your component library, and that needs to have component level CSS. You could manage it with style sheets, but then you have too much CSS on the page. Like you can't split that. So if you're using CSS modules and then have some mechanism for, like, right now, I don't think that in Remix, I'd have to play around with it, but you can't have one of those Babel plugins with Remix. You can't even customize ES build. That's a very intentional decision, very unlikely to change. And so, but this is a problem that we could address possibly in the future, or figure out some way to solve this problem, where like you need to be able to split things up. But right now, without making any changes other than adding CSS module support to Remix, I would just say import this package if you want a button, import this one if you want the accordion, import that one if you want the link or whatever. And so you wouldn't just have one package, you'd just have a bunch of packages that you just import the different components you want. And yeah, I think that's probably what I would do.
Okay, so are you saying, you've probably answered this already and I missed it, but are you saying that CSS modules is going to give me the code splitting out of the box?
What I'm saying
without the Babel plugin or whatever?
Yes, it can. The challenge is, and the reason that Babel plugin exists is if you say, wow, this sure is inconvenient. I want a button, I want a link, I want a avatar, I want like a card. I don't want to have an import for every one of those components. That's super annoying. So how about I just put all of those imports in one file and re-export them? And now I just can do name specifiers to import each individual component that I want with just one import. But once you do that, then Webpack, and I'm pretty sure ES Build too, will just say, oh, sweet, you want all these things, rather than like looking at the specific imports.
Yeah. Okay.
And so
that's where the plugin.
That's where the plugin comes in.
Okay.
Now that to me seems like there should be a way to work around that, or like there should be a way to solve that problem. And I think it's the side effects true in the package JSON. Like you can say, hey, this module has no side effects, even though technically it does, but like no important side effects if the component's not actually used. And so I believe that feature is supposed to be able to make it so that you can import something without and have it tree shaken, even if it's been imported in another file or something. But yeah, that would be something I would investigate.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, thanks. I think that does me for now. I'll be back.
Okay, cool, Daniel.
Thanks.
All right, Alyssa, I know you've got some questions in here. Do you want me just to go to the first one?
Yeah, I kind of have like two schools of thoughts with questions because I'm just my first time kind of dabbling with Remix. So actually, I think I'd rather you start with the second because
Okay, yeah.
that kind of covered. I guess, yeah. I don't know if you've read it, but the crux of it is just like, how do I kind of like
Oh yeah, I did read this.
grab data like in a more like dynamic way, I guess, or not tied to some type of form event or something. That's kind of the main disconnect I think I'm having. Because I'm trying to learn dimensions of, how to do it. So
Right, yeah. So you have the geolocation API in the browser. Fun fact, Cloudflare actually has a utility that you can use on the server to know the user's geolocation. So you could like potentially just know this on the server.
okay.
I don't know anything about that. I've just seen a demo. It looks pretty interesting. But let's say that doesn't exist. You just want to use the geolocation API in the browser. Because it's happening in the browser, you can't know in the loader what the geolocation is. So you have to wait until the client is hydrated to be able to do that. So you're going to have a use effect that requests access, and then the user gives access. You have a callback when the user gives access. And now what do you do? How do you go get the data that says, hey, get me the data for this geolocation? So the solution for that in Remix is to use what's called use fetcher.
Okay.
And I will just paste this in
I've been
here.
referencing that. I just wasn't sure how to,
So you're on the right track then.
Okay.
So actually this Remix single might be helpful for you, but the specific thing that you're looking for is fetcher.load. So you'll say, hey, I have my use effect thing, and now that I have my browser staff, I'll bump that up for you. Where is it? There it is. Now that I have like browser permission and whatever, fetcher load, and you can set this to be a post, or actually, you know what? Because you'd probably just use query param or query string. You could do either. So if you want to do a get, it's fetcher load. If you want to do a post, then it's fetcher submit. Either one will work. And then whichever one you do, if it's load, you're going to do your loader. If it's submit, then it's going to be in your action. And you can do it within the same file, or you can make a resource route that's responsible for this. And just for folks, resource route. So that's another handy thing. So you could have this in a separate file, but personally, I actually really like having just one file. So anyway, you'd say, oh, okay, so you want to know about the geolocation from the database thing. And so then you just send that response. And now the fetcher will have data on it that you can use to render whatever you want.
Gotcha. Okay, because I definitely I've watched most of the singles, I think, and I was thinking, okay, use fetcher based on the documentation seems like something is what I want to use, but I was not sure if I had to link it to something or so I could just use it like that and not have it tied to particular. Okay, and then for the fetcher.load, say I want to pass in I get the longitude and latitude, right? I just would make a search param or something with that URL, and then okay.
You could do, or actually you could even do, I don't know. I don't think you can. I think in the browser you can actually do just a new URL law. Nope, it's not invalid. It has to be the whole URL. So I'd probably just do a URL search params.
Okay.
And you can actually do, let me bump that up a little bit. I think you should be able to do an object in here in foo bar. And then if we go, whoa, rats, I ruined it. Search params, foo bar, toString. Yeah. So you just put them in there. You get your toString, and then you can just do, my route thing. There you go.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was just getting a little confused. I was saying fetcher.form. I was like, okay, maybe I still need a form. So it's I wasn't sure how the process works, because my understanding is that the loader runs initially when you kind of navigate to the page. So I wasn't sure how do you, but this so once I do fetcher.load, it will then kind of call that again. And then if I want to have different conditions, I guess run this, make this API call based on this condition, then I can just have some conditional set within the loader that kind of handles the different scenarios that I want to deal with. Is that kind of?
Yep, exactly. So you'd have two, there are two ways to go about this. You could have one that's just a resource route. And so when you say fetcher load, you point to the resource route, and that just has logic for the geolocation stuff. If you want to keep it in the same file, then you'll just have your loader. But remember that loader is called for the server render as well, for the use loader data. And so you'll need to have some sort of, as you were saying, some logic to determine who's calling me. And that should be pretty straightforward. Like maybe add an additional query param that says, this is what I'm calling. Like this is what, for actions, when you have a form, we have the button with the underscore action thing to determine which action to run. So it'd be something similar to that.
Okay. Yeah, this is that. Thank you for clearing that up. Cause I was just like, well, what if I don't want to attach the fetcher to like a form, but I didn't know that I could just kind of do it. Okay. Just like that. Then that kind of, that makes sense. Yeah. Cause I'm really trying to understand the conventions of how to do it. Cause how to do it within Remix. So I'm trying to intentionally force myself to get out of the habit of like, okay, trying to, I'm going to do fetch here. And like, no, how do you do it? I love the benefits of like, just you have that use loader data and it's just all there and you don't have to keep track of all that. So I'm really trying to follow the conventions. I'm a little slower on it because of it, but it's good,
Yeah, well, so last year I took snowboarding lessons for the first time. And I've been snowboarding a lot. I was pretty good. And I finally was like, I'll just take some lessons. And they're like, yeah, you do everything wrong. Like, oh, dang it. And so I spent the next, couple of times way worse as a snowboarder. And it was so frustrating. And then when I finally got it the way that they were teaching me now, I got a broken clavicle right now, so I can't snowboard at all. But when I do go snowboarding, I feel so much smoother. It's so much more efficient and I don't fall as much. And so, yeah, sometimes people make the mistake, and you clearly are not making this mistake. But sometimes people make the mistake that like, oh, this is different than what I'm used to. I don't like it. And the right way to approach learning something new is, oh, this is different than what I'm used to, but I trust in the process and I'm going to assume that when I do it the way that they say, it will be better for me.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear when that day comes for you and tell me that, that you like it better.
Right. And doing like a little hackathon project. So I was like, you know what? This is a side project idea I've had. Let me try and use Remix for this, greenfield development. So why not, so, and, so I'm just trying to, really get into the weeds and learn kind of how it works. And I love that it will make you better at web fundamentals. Cause I'm like a tried and true front end developer. Like I don't do a lot of, all this back end stuff. So like, I'm like connecting a database and that's what I was asking about Prisma and the Remix channel.
Oh yeah.
So like, it's a lot of new learnings for me, but it's good because it's helping me, I don't know, learn new things about stuff I don't really get to deal with.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that was me last year. I was like, oh my gosh, am I seriously deploying my own database right now? Like, who do I think I am?
Yeah. So, okay. So then that is what I would, okay. So I'll probably be use fetcher a lot then for things like that. Cause I know I read in the docs, it's like, if you're trying to do more like app-like experiences, then use fetcher is probably something that you'll use.
Yeah, you often will find yourself using use fetcher quite a bit. Just, it's just good to recognize the trade-offs. And of course, when you're doing client-side fetching post hydration, then that just means like loading states, where if you can do it on the server render, it's better. But like in this case, you can't because you need to use a browser API. So
yeah. Okay. Well, I think that answers that one. I just have the other one about like, I'm working with the headless UI stuff. So I'm thinking maybe hidden inputs. I've seen that used in examples before for how to handle maybe non-native input elements, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't read the whole thing.
It's kind of long.
Curious how to incorporate this element into a form in Remix. I'd like to take the value from the list box component, create search param that I can leverage from a different route. For example, in the list box is on the route search stations. After a selection has been made and submitted, I want to navigate the user to stations list, name whatever that list box value was. Okay, sweet. Yeah. So because it's a list box, that's like a form element. And so they should, do they have a live demo somewhere? Is this a live demo? Oh, sweet. Yeah. So let me bump that down just a tiny bit. Under the hood.
If that's easier, Kent, they have that little code. I don't know if you
oh, that's okay. I just need to see the what's rendered in the DOM.
Oh, yeah.
Because what they should be doing is this should have a form element somewhere. Potentially, nope, that wouldn't be it.
Oh, you're saying if they like implement it to the ARIA spec. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And my assumption is that they would.
Right.
But what I'm seeing right now is that they're not, which is
Interesting.
um,
Yeah, because I actually did compare IDs that were ARIA like documentation all the time, and I was like trying to look at the list box.
yeah, this is actually a surprise to me.
Interesting.
So maybe there's a reason, or maybe this is a bug. But we have a way to work around it. But this is this is not good. So like if it's a form element, then they have to render an actual form thing for accessibility reasons and for like, heck, it's the web platform, my goodness, reasons. But given that I don't see any form element in here, I'm thinking, well, I know a solution. I'm just trying to think if like they have a way to build in the solution. Yeah, like how does a screen reader user use this? I guess like the screen reader is just like, okay, I've got that, and they can just see it, and then you do, or they read it out, what's going on. I guess it's fine from an accessibility standpoint. It's probably fine. And so because they're not rendering a form, I still feel like that's a bug, and what they should do is probably render a hidden input with the value. But given that they don't do that, you could open an issue and say, hey, like this would be nice. So then I could hook this up with my form. But because they don't do that, all that you need to do is when you're rendering this list box thing, just right next to it, right above the list box or something, you put a hidden input that is what the selected value is.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like I was on the right track with that. I've never like had to do that before. I'm actually not familiar with adding a form to the input, like when you're trying to.
Yeah, we're really used to having like maybe a use effect here, or putting it in on change and doing a fetch or something, or a navigate in your case. But yeah, and you could do that actually. The benefit of doing a hidden input and a form. Well, actually, I guess it depends. Like, do you want them to instantly be navigated when they choose one of these, or do you want them to like choose one and then hit submit?
Choose one and hit submit.
Okay, yeah. So that's totally a form. And actually, yeah. Anyway, yeah. And so in that case, your submit handler will hit the action, and it will say, oh, sweet. So here's the form value for what they had selected, because you had a hidden input in there, and then you can redirect them. If your use case was, oh, I just want them to choose one and then I redirect, then what you would do in that case is this would be an on change, and you would just use navigate. And so that's a hook, use navigate. And then you would call in the on change, you'd call navigate to the route that you wanted to with the query string and everything. And then in that case, you wouldn't need a form. But also in that case, it wouldn't work before JavaScript loads. So there's no progressive enhancement there. It just like doesn't work, which is fine, but it's just something to know.
Okay, so gotcha. So in the scenario where like, because I have a list of states, like US states that are loaded, that can be called in the loader where you grab that in and populate that. But then based on that selection there, I want you to populate a list of cities based on the state you've chosen. That would be a scenario where I'd probably use the use fetcher, I guess, where it's something that happens like after the load. It's based on, the selection that happens, after everything's been loaded.
Yeah, so you could do that. Another thing that you could do though is when they submit the city, then you can update the URL to have that in the URL string. Yeah. And then that will trigger the loader to run again. And the loader can say, do you have a city selected? Oh, sweet. I will additionally send, or a country or whatever. I will additionally send the cities for that country. And so you could actually keep it if that's, so it just depends. Like, are you okay sticking that in the URL? And if you are, that's sweet. Even if you're not, you could actually probably still make that work by putting it in a session. But yeah, I would personally, if I were in your shoes, as a user, I really like having being able to deep link into stuff. And so if you put it in the URL, then I can say, hey, this is the country I'm in, like here's the cities I want you to choose from or whatever. So yeah, that's probably the way I would approach it. If you can make it work with a regular loader thing, then that's optimal for everybody. So
okay. And I think, okay, so how the loaders, okay, because I think I may be misunderstanding how loaders work. They just run when you navigate, but like when I update the, like, add that search param, I guess, when I
Mhm.
set the state, the loader will then again run, like, just run on its own, and like I don't have to do anything to
Yeah.
tell. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there are two options there. You can either do a client side, use search params hook and
Mhm.
set the search params when they make their selection.
Okay.
Or what I think would probably be better is you have an action when they select it. So they submit, I chose my state or whatever. I don't, or did you say they're states or countries?
States, but
States.
same, yeah, all good.
Yeah. So they say, oh, I chose my state. I hit submit. That's going to be an action. The action like verifies that they chose the right thing or whatever, and then redirects with the state in the query string. So it comes back and Hydrated Remix says, oh, sweet. You want me to do a client side navigation over there. So I'll client side navigate. It's the same thing, same page. And so I know which components need to, or which loaders need to be called. So I'll call those. The loader gets run and says, oh, sweet, you've got the state in the search params. So now I can send you some cities and stuff.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I have to play around. Okay, because I was thinking actions were only used for like mutations. I was like, well, I'm not really mutating anything yet. I'm just, trying to filter down a little bit. So I wasn't sure if that was the right use case for it, but it sounds like.
Yeah, actions, you're right. Actions are typically for mutations. I suppose what you're mutating is the URL.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know that counted as a mutation. I guess that's where my confusion was kind of lying. I guess I didn't know if that would count as a mutation or not, but I guess sounds like go about it is kind of what I'm gathering. Is this like different?
Yeah, what I'm doing on my blog page is not too different from what you're doing. Okay. And I go with the client side approach. So as I choose these different things, it will update this and it updates the URL. And I do that all client side. And so if I were to say, hey, JavaScript is disabled here, like the page works, but these buttons will not work. They don't do anything. And so that's just, that wasn't actually a conscious decision that I made, but I could fix that if it mattered to me. I could fix that by making these forms and having them actually hit the back end. I guess the reason I wouldn't do that for myself is because all of this is client side anyway. So you actually can't load more articles without JavaScript because this doesn't actually do a submission. I actually load all of the article data on the initial load, and then I just hide them so that you don't have to scroll forever. And then when you click this, I just decide how many to show. Because like, frankly, as cool as it is that you can disable JavaScript, I mean, most of the time the JavaScript is going to load and it's going to be fine. So, but like if it mattered, I don't have to change my entire mental model to make it work. I just like do it a little differently.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry if I may ask just a few I think I'm just going to kind of reiterate to make sure I'm understanding, and it'll click for me eventually. I know it will. But like, so if I want to go the action route, I would need to put it in a form and then have the hidden inputs, I guess, for like each, like I'll have two different like list box elements. So, and have a hidden input for each one that I want to eventually have update the search params. If I go just client way, I guess, then I would just use loader, use fetcher to maybe, no, I need to just set the search param in the thing, and then the use loader will kind of naturally update it. Is that kind of, sorry, hopefully that's.
Yep, that's exactly right. Okay. Yeah, so you use the use search params hook, say set search params, and the loader will update when those search params are updated.
Cool. All right, awesome. I think that makes sense, and I think as I play around with it, I'll be able to see, but at least I have some kind of different options. So yeah, the hidden input thing is just not something I've ever done before. It seemed like that might be the route I needed to go anyway. So okay.
Yeah, that was new for me too. Folks who were doing like Rails and PHP and stuff, they're like, oh man, this is my jam. Like this is like what they always do. So like those folks are really excited about it. They're like, oh, I remember this. But for me, I'm just like, what in the world is going on?
Okay, that makes sense. And that helps me because that's the last little kind of piece. I was kind of like, well, how do you handle more dynamic interactions where you're not explicitly clicking on, the button or doing whatever but you want to react to something that happens after the loader has occurred. So I'm not doing a mutation. So I was kind of like, where is the example, so, and I watched all the singles and stuff, but mostly kind of forms and stuff. So I wasn't sure exactly.
Yeah, we should probably have a single for what you're talking about. In fact, if you want to, I personally would love an example of using the geolocation API with UseFetcher. That would be sweet.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll make sure to share the project like once it's actually fully fleshed out. I have till the end of the month to do it. Hopefully I can get it done. But yeah, I'd love to share it, and I'll try and write, my learnings at some point.
Yeah, that would be sweet.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. I look forward to hearing you give talks and stuff about Remix.
I appreciate it, and happy to see you're doing well and all that. So
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. So let's see. Ellis is asking, do you have an example repo with testing library set up? Or actually, really quick, sorry. Anybody else in the Zoom have a question before I jump? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to pop in really quick, if that's all right, Ken.
Yeah, go for it. Hi.
For Remix, I'm looking at migrating a couple projects to Remix. They're super basic and simple. And I guess my two questions are, one of them, I don't have control of the hosting, and it's hosted on a pretty traditional, like, these are the files that get served. There's no like server,
Yeah.
Is that a use case, or is that like, we don't statically generate the files, so no go?
Yeah, so I mean, you can make it work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that's built into Remix or probably will ever be built into Remix,
Cool.
because it's not a great user experience.
Yep,
But you can make it work. And the way that you do it is there's this tool called wget. And I'm sure there are other similar tools or something, but it basically what you can use with wget is download website. You can point wget to a website and it will just download everything. And so what you can do is you can, whatever, you can Google it.
Yeah, I'll look at that.
But
it's
what
probably
you can do
more
is
trouble than it's worth for this like super basic, thing.
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. So what you would do is you'd build your Remix app, but you just have to remember, and everything that you're doing as you're building your Remix app is that these loaders only run at build time. And these actions there are no actions. You can't have actions. At least not your own action functions. You'd have to have all of your forms and everything have to point to a different server. You probably wouldn't use forms because your other server probably doesn't understand forms. They're probably expecting JSON requests and stuff. So you'd be using UseFetcher for like pretty much everything. And useLoader data would only be used for stuff that is data that's okay to get at build time. So for any dynamic getting of data, you're using UseFetcher. Any mutations, you're using probably UseFetcher. And then because of that, you have to manage keeping the cache up to date yourself. So you're basically like on that same ground floor level as you are with Next or Gatsby or something when you do this. And this is just like inherent problem of static site generation.
Yeah.
But if you
I was
can
going to say this particular site is like one, maybe 2 pages. It was just like, oh, maybe like I can update this a little bit and just use a framework that I know more.
Yeah. And actually, so here's the really cool thing. This is why I say, even though it's not supported by Remix internally, the fact that you can make it work is great. And here's the reason. So you make it work. So let me finish explaining. So to make all of this work, you build it that way. You in CI, you start up a server. Like you start up your Remix server, like you do your Remix build, you start the server, and then you point wget to the local server, and it downloads all the files, and then you take all of those files, those static files, and upload them to your that hosting thing that's just for static files. So then the reason why it's good to do this rather than using Next or Gatsby is because in the future, when this app becomes more than just 2 pages and has more like complex needs, you can say, hey, we can totally do those things for you, but I am going to need a server. So give me a server. And now you can take that same Remix app and suddenly make it completely dynamic and server rendered and everything without changing the mental model or changing a lot of the code or anything.
Yeah, cool. And then part 2 is for like something a little more involved, like a Next.js type site that's set up. when you migrated, you started a whole new repo and sort of started from scratch. I think like you had like your KCD Dodds site, and then you had like KCD Dodds dash remix, and then you kind of like renamed stuff when you migrated it all.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that over, say, like, oh, just start a new branch, gut it, start over, and then merge that branch in?
Yeah, why didn't I think it was just a lot simpler
Yeah.
for me to do a different repo. The biggest challenge there, of course, is all of that Git history is
Mhm.
old, but like I think I've already got like 1,000 commits just on kentcdots.com, like the new one. So like I don't know if I need to go back to that old Git history. The nice thing is if I ever do, I do still have the archived version of the repo. So yeah, that's probably what I'd recommend on something that is effectively an entire brand new rewrite. You don't want to bring the cruft along. Like you'd be really tempted to be like, oh, well, here's this little script that I had. I'm going to keep that around. And now it's sticking around. Nobody knows what it does.
Cool. So yeah, you would recommend start a new repo, start from scratch, and
Yeah,
then
I
kind of
think
rename
that would
and
be-
repoint stuff when you're done.
Yep.
Sweet. Thanks.
Sure thing. Yushan or Yushan, you can tell me how to say your name. But your hand has been raised very patiently. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi again, I am Ishan Fernando. I have a question to ask from one of your articles. The article called Testing Implementation Details.
Mm.
In that article, you propose a new requirement, allow for multiple accordion items to be open at once.
Yeah.
In that requirement, the state can be like have an array
Yeah.
that open indexes. Yeah. Open index can have not only 0 but also 1. When we have two numbers, the newer test implementation even fail.
Yeah. So when
we have two numbers.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm saying in this case is if we so this is a new feature, right? And so you're gonna have your existing test that says if I open one accordion, then that accordion is open. And then you add this feature. This added feature should not break that old test. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And then you can add another test that says I can open two. So the problem with testing implementation details is with Enzyme, which like basically not many people are using anymore. At the time I wrote the article, a lot of people were. But with Enzyme, the way that they would say is you have to say on that original test, you'd say wrapper state open indexes to equal 0. But now you added this new feature and you have to change the old test. And that's the problem. That's where you're testing implementation details, because the user doesn't care that it's open index or open indexes. They don't care anything about that. All they care about is when I click this, does it open? And so that's what your test should do. And so, yeah.
When we update the test, as you said, when we write the test, you are saying with the way you write the test, it supports both ways. Even the open indexes have a single one or both one, right?
Yeah. So if you write it free of implementation details, and then adding this new feature should not break the old tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me check. Yeah, when we add multiple values like 0 and 1, the new test implementation is also false negative.
Sorry, say that again.
When we have 0, the test implementation is not break. But when we add 0 and 1, the test implementation is break, but the UI is working properly. So it is a false negative.
You're talking about when our test is implemented yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So we have to update the test implementation if we add two numbers.
Yep. Or even if you have if you change nothing other than the way that you implement it. So even before you add support for multiple indexes, if you just change the state variable name, you could change it to anything. the moment you change the state variable name and everything, like you just update everything in the component implementation to say, okay, so here are all of the, I change it from open index to just open because I wanted it to be shorter. So even if you leave this as a single number, you're only opening one. As soon as you've changed that implementation, the other test, the enzyme test would break because it relies on what that's called. But what that's called should just be an internal implementation detail.
Okay. Thank you. Again.
Yeah, sure thing. Cool. Anybody else have a question?
Can I ask one quick follow-up? I'm so sorry. I don't want to
Yeah.
but when for the use loader, like if I was to do use fetcher to like try and grab more data, do I need to return everything again, or is like Remix smart enough to know to like, you return this previous data, like we're merging kind of these two like objects? Does that make sense? Kind of like say I grab something on load, now can something happen that I want to get some new stuff? Do I need to intentionally merge the two different things, or does it kind of do that on its own?
Yeah. So I may be misunderstanding your use case. So you have some data that you're returning on the server render, and then you want some additional data from useFetcher.
Right. Like I have this, the states that I'm returning, and then I want cities now. But like, I guess do I need to return both back, I guess? Because I probably I don't want to overfetch, I guess is what I'm saying. Like if I've already gotten the states, that's kind of what, I don't know.
Yeah. So you want to, the way that you want to think about the loader is that whenever it's called, whatever it returns is exactly what's going to be the data property of the fetcher and what you get back from use loader data. Okay. And so, yeah, there's no magic merging or anything like that. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. Gotcha.
Cool. All right, sweet. So let's see if I can get through the questions that we have in Discord here before we wrap up. So Alice was asking about testing library with Remix app. That is like really high on my priority. In fact, here's my list of things to do. I've got a bunch of examples that people have made PRs for, and that's my first thing I need to get done. Of course, every day I have handling email that I need to do. So that's going to come first. That's probably going to take me, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. Depends. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. But then I need to review those examples, and then figuring out component testing is what I need to do. We currently don't have a good solution for that. For like components that use the link or anything. Like you can mock those things out. You can mock out the link, you can mock out use fetcher, you can mock out all of that stuff. But yeah, we want to have a nice solution so you don't have to mock those things out. And especially like with use fetcher, if you're building a component that is using use fetcher, we want you to be able to easily test all of the different submission states and stuff like that. So we need to figure that out, and that is on my list. It's like the next big thing for me. Yeah, so the answer to your question is no, sorry. I have seen some people set up things, but yeah, that the core problem of I want to actually test those states and things like we don't have a blessed solution for that, I guess. It is possible you just mock it and stuff, and that's probably what we may end up doing. But my end deliverable is at least a docs page that is testing, and then my other deliverable could possibly be a package that is utilities for testing. But anyway, that is the current state of things, and they might not be here, so just answered this one, just so they know that I did answer. Okay. Amir is asking, appreciate it if you show me how these two methods are different and when is one more appropriate. They're later debounced. Okay, so we have validate form. We get the form from this dot state. We call this validate form thing. It's form valid, and then set state. Yeah, okay. And then we have validate form 2. Oh, okay, great. So this is the difference between, callbacks and or like the callback form and the just setting the state. I actually have a blog post about this, so let me grab that. Let's see, use state updater. There it is. So I will share this with you. But basically let's see. Yeah, dispatch function updates. Yeah, so I actually described the problem right here pretty well. So I'm because of the lacking of time that I've got, I will just refer you to that, and hopefully that answers your question. Okay, great. Dwayne, sorry. Any chance Remix might reconsider not extending ESBuild sooner than later? I had issues trying to use Rust for the backend. Yeah, so we really don't want to open up the, yeah, let me answer this question, then I'll get to you, Yashan. We really don't want to open up the compiler. Yeah, anybody who does that has just a world of trouble with that. And so like the community members do, not the maintainers. I mean, the maintainers now, it's their problem too. But yeah, so we really want to avoid that. And instead, what we want to do is figure out the use cases that people have and solve those ourselves one way or another. So if you want to use Rust for the backend, I'm not sure why that would necessarily be a problem. What I would do is just Rust can be your backend server that's running over here. And then your loaders and your actions are just proxying over to that Rust backend. So there may be a use case that I'm missing there. And if that's the case, then I would suggest opening a GitHub discussion on the Remix repo, and you can kind of discuss the use case and see if we can already solve that for you, or if there's something that we need to change internally. But yeah, we really don't want to open up ESBuild. Now, that said, there is always patch package, which I do not recommend for anything more than experimentation. But in the early days of Remix, I use this a lot. In fact, I still use it for some packages, not Remix, on my app. So it's pretty liberating to be able to make changes to your dependencies while you wait for PRs to be merged and stuff like that. So, or like a dependency that the maintainer is kind of abandoned, you can just have like a couple little changes. So anyway, that's what I would suggest is if you just want to experiment with things and play around, then use patch package to do that experimentation. You can provide the patch as like a PR or something as well. Say, this is all that it would change, and here's the use case that I have. And then we can talk about, well, we can satisfy that use case better in a different way, or let's build it in or something. So, okay, Yushan.
Ken, a quick question. Can you provide me a resource to learn about testing using latest techniques in JavaScript?
Yeah. So I've got testingjavascript.com. And that did not hyperlink. Let me hyperlink that. So testingjavascript.com is the best place to learn testing for JavaScript. I will say that it was updated in 2020, but it does and it hasn't been since. But there have been library changes, so some or tool changes. So some of the tools that we use in here have been changed. The biggest one is Husky. It's a pre-commit or a Git hook utility that had a pretty significant change. Most everything else is still exactly as it was. But when you're learning about testing or really anything, you're much less concerned about tools and more concerned about techniques. And that is, you will 100% get that from this. So yeah, that's what I would recommend is testingjavascript.com. Not just because I made it, but because it's really good.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jacob is gone. Sorry, Jacob, but he had he was talking about the geolocation thing. Sweet. Okay, Mateus, what is the best way of validating forms in Remix? But on the client side, looks like the default flow is to send server validation in the action. Isn't a better user experience to validate before submit? So the default is you always have to validate your form on the server. You cannot avoid that. Do not try, because hackers will be able to just hit your form directly and skip all your client-side validation. So do not try to skip server validation. That said, it does make a lot of sense to validate on this on the client as well. For like, I'm typing and I don't want to have to hit enter before I find out that like I was messed up on something. Just please make it so that I can finish typing before you say that I'm wrong. But yeah, so client-side validation works just like anything else in React. You have some state, and as the user is typing, you update that state, you do your validation, and then you display it if it's the proper time to display. And what's cool is that because Remix route modules have the action inside the same file as the form, if you had any validation logic that you're required to have on the server that you want to share on the client, you literally just put that validation logic in a function, put it right here and call it in both places. So you can really do actual code sharing, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, sweet. That's it. Yushan, your hand is still up. Did you have another question really quick?
No, Kent.
Oh, okay, cool. Sweet. So that is it. Anybody have last minute questions before I take off? Okay, so I'm probably going to be live streaming. I'm going to take a little break and then I'll live stream a little bit. So if anybody wants to join me, it'll be on YouTube. Like I said, I have email, so I probably won't live stream that. It's pretty boring because I always put that over here because like people probably don't want me live streaming their emails as they're sending to me. So I'll probably do the email first, and then I might do component testing this afternoon. I do have some meetings, so I may not be able to get to it. But if you want to know when I am live streaming, then you can just go to my YouTube, which some of you are probably watching it on here right now. And you can subscribe, and I don't have that, but you can subscribe and hit the bell and you'll know whenever I'm live streaming. So, all right, that was fun. Thanks everybody, especially Daniel and Alyssa. You had very insightful questions, so I appreciate those especially.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see everybody later.